the Honorable Attorney General and Minister for Economy, Civil Service and Communications to deliver the COVID-19 response budget address.
I now call on the Attorney General and Minister for Economy, Civil Service and Communications, the Honorable Ayaz Said Qayyum, take the floor. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, Honourable Prime Minister, Honourable Leader of Opposition, Ministers, Members of Parliament, Assistant Ministers, my fellow Fijians. Thank you for tuning in tonight, wherever and however you're joining us this evening. As you can see by the way we're all spread throughout the chamber, these are not normal times. We've made these changes to ensure we're adhering to the principles of physical distancing. So if you're watching from a public venue, stop, look around the room, and follow this example by making sure you're keeping a safe distance of 2 meters from all other individuals. And then maintain that level of diligence and distance as much as possible in everything you do. Do it for your health, do it for the health of the most vulnerable amongst us, do it for Fiji. Mr. Speaker, sir, since its origins in Wuhan, China last year, Fijians have watched the novel coronavirus, or COVID-19, spread from country to country and then continent to continent, crippling markets and sickening tens and now hundreds of thousands in its wake, with the worst clearly yet to come. This is a crisis bigger than anything the world has seen in a century. Hundreds of people are dying every day. Hospitals in the world's wealthiest and most powerful nations are being pushed to their breaking points. The United States of America just saw case numbers surge past 65,000, up from 15,000 cases 4 short days ago. 50,000 in 4 days. In the most badly affected nations like Italy, doctors are being forced to choose who to treat, who lives and who dies. Both Italy and Spain have now eclipsed China in COVID-19 fatalities, despite having much smaller populations. Any student of Fijian history watching this evening knows that pandemics like COVID-19 must be battled with the same urgency as full-scale military conflicts. If not, they can be just as fatal as any war. In 1875, measles arrived at Fiji's shores when one of the chiefs visited New South Wales. The disease ultimately claimed the lives of an estimated 40,000 Fijians, 1/3 of the entire population at that time. Then in 1918, the Spanish flu broke out across the world, infecting 500 million people and killing around 50 million. Upon arrival at Fiji's shores, the virus claimed the lives of nearly 9,000 Fijians, 5% of all people in Fiji at that time. These are the cold, hard facts of our history. Taking stock of this past should not drive us into panic, but it should serve as a sober reminder that extreme crises of health warrant the sternest possible measures in response before it's too late. When it comes to COVID-19, it does not rank among humanity's deadliest diseases. Recent viral strains like SARS, MERS, and Ebola have all proven much more fatal. When it comes to the sheer number of deaths, NCDs like heart disease and cancer still outpace COVID-19 in the number of victims they claim. But it is the nature of this new coronavirus that has made this disease the trickiest, most unpredictable, and most punishing pandemic of our lifetimes. It's highly contagious. Even as symptoms aren't showing, it thrives in everyday environments. It can go undetected in young and healthy people until they infect a more vulnerable member of society. It spikes as people go about their day-to-day lives. And quickly and quietly, the virus has spread around the world, killing thousands and dismantling the way people live and the world does business. In doing so, it has upended the very fundamentals of the global economy. It's clear we're faced with more than a crisis of health, far more. Mr. Speaker, sir, if I could just perhaps get I'm being disturbed by the talk that's going on there.
Honorable members, when you're spaced apart, it doesn't mean that you can converse at will.
It's clear, Mr. Speaker, sir, we're faced with more than a crisis of health, far more. This is a crisis of lives and livelihoods alike. No government, no business, no financial institution, and no multilateral organization was ready for the economic devastation of this pandemic. Indeed, some leaders even scoffed at it. Under the strain of necessary travel restrictions, rightful health concerns, and other unimagined impacts, we are facing a once-in-a-lifetime coronavirus-driven collapse of the very foundations of the international economic system. Some people, including here in Fiji, are still dangerously blind to this new reality. They need to take a good, long look at the world economy. Entire industries are crumbling, businesses are closing, and unemployment is skyrocketing. Major stock indexes are plummeting, carving of trillions of dollars in value, and the floor is nowhere to be seen. Companies that mere months ago were considered economic stalwarts, including the world's largest airline, are hurtling towards insolvency. This virus has paralyzed the world, literally. No one is going anywhere. Planes are empty, sitting idle. Airports are deserted. Once humming factory floors are silent. Flows of trade reduced to trickles. Supply chains are unhinged. With only a handful of exceptions, every business, everywhere in the world, is facing its most difficult year on record. In even the best case scenario of global containment, this will be the most severe global economic depression of our time, worse than anything our parents or most of our grandparents have experienced. We're talking worse than the global financial crisis. For Fiji, the economic fallout will not only prove greater than Cyclone Winston, it will be far worse than Cyclones Winston, Josie, Kenny, Gita, and Tony all combined. Every aspect of our economy will be thrown out of whack. Even in the global financial crisis, planes were still flying. In 2009, our arrivals were down only 7.3% on the year. The year after Winston, tourism numbers actually surged by 6.4%. As of today, Nadi Airport is shut down. Over the next few months, there will not be a tourism sector in Fiji. Right off the bat, that's up to 38% of our GDP gone. Even if we were an ICT-driven economy, call centers and other workplaces would close as well. In fact, one call center has already planned a permanent shutdown in Fiji. Meanwhile, the rest of the world economy, including our major markets, is rapidly approaching recession territory, propelled by historic declines in growth across Asia and Europe. While we'd already been preparing for softened regional growth numbers, COVID-19 threw a grenade into any of the world's economic projections. Australia, our largest source of tourism and trade, had been riding the longest recorded streak of unbroken economic expansion among the developed world, a remarkable feat spanning nearly 29 years. 29 years, Mr. Speaker, sir. Coronavirus has derailed their growth in a matter of weeks. In a matter of weeks, 29 years of growth derailed in a matter of weeks. Our friends in New Zealand, meanwhile, will likely see an even bigger impact, as the global travel shutdown has decimated an economy that prides tourism as its largest export earner. Like our more developed neighbours, Mr. Speaker, sir, Fiji's projection for our 11th year of growth have reversed in a matter of weeks also. Under the crushing weight of this pandemic, our economy is projected to contract by 4.3% this year, an optimistic projection that depends entirely on the success of Fiji and our major source markets in combating the virus. COVID-19 has been present in Fiji for exactly 1 week as of today, with 5 Fijians with COVID-19 in the country. We are aggressively moving to stomp out this virus and prevent a large-scale outbreak. But if people, including some supposedly well-educated individuals continue violating the strict measures we've instituted and the virus spreads further, we will have no choice but to lock down all of Fiji. In that scenario, non-essential businesses will be closed nationwide. Infrastructure development will stall. Students' education will suffer. Economic activity will grind to a halt. We're likely to see a massive loss in productivity, the weakening of our domestic supply chains, and a double-digit economic contraction. But even if we were successful in containing the disease, and God willing, we see our last case sooner rather than later, we are still part of the global economy. What if Australia, New Zealand, or the United States fail at containing the outbreaks? So long as they remain vulnerable, we remain vulnerable. Our people's jobs in the tourism sector remain vulnerable, and our economy remains vulnerable. Wealthier nations can dip into the deep fiscal reserves to ride out the recovery. But small states do not have the luxury of bailing out entire industries or pumping trillions of dollars into our financial markets. Instead of operating in silos, we must rely on international solidarity. That is why we are a bit disappointed and even disheartened to see some choose to politicize a recent article we penned for the Financial Times of London, one of the world's leading sources for economic views. There was no political agenda behind this article. In fact, Mr. Speaker, sir, it was an overtly and intentionally apolitical call for assistance from multilateral development banks and a recognition that small island states will face a unique set of problems and vulnerabilities in our economic recovery. The article wasn't written for me or for our party or even only for Fiji. It was written for our Pacific brothers and sisters, from the Solomon Islands to the Cook Islands, our fellow islanders of the coast of Africa, in the Caribbean, and everywhere in between. Small island states around the globe that are suffering, desperately needing relief as tourism cash flows evaporate and supply chains are eviscerated. Some of the world's most vulnerable small state economies may not even survive. And no one nation can go in this crisis alone. Thankfully, Mr. Speaker, sir, despite the political games here at home, our international partners heard our call. Our diplomatic and multilateral partners have given us a great deal of positive feedback, generally and indeed on that article, and have begun to step up to help us both contain and plan our recovery from coronavirus. In the wake of COVID-19, we've had positive discussions with the Asian Development Bank to top up its previously pledged funding of $100 million by up to another $100 million more. The World Bank is also offering Fiji $5 million from its COVID-19 facility, adding more fuel to our fight. Mr. Speaker, sir, this level of cooperation surely lends security. Certainty, Mr. Speaker, sir, however, remains elusive. At the moment, what we know about the situation is as terrifying as we don't. Every hour, the ground shifts beneath our feet. We don't know how long this pandemic will last, or when a vaccine will be ready. We don't know how deep the economic impacts will be. We don't know how many around the world will die. We don't know if how we live, how we work, and how we interact with the world will change forever. But what we do know is this, Mr. Speaker, sir, ordinary Fijians cannot bear the brunt of this crisis alone. The people of this country and the businesses of this country deserve every measure of support their government can afford to give them. And that support, Mr. Speaker, sir, is precisely what this bill is all about. This budget, through this bill, Mr. Speaker, sir, arms our doctors and nurses with the tools they need to combat this virus and keep themselves and their Fijian families safe. It puts more testing kits in our molecular labs, more ventilators in our hospitals, more masks on our healthcare workers, and more beds in our fever clinics. This budget grants resilience to all the workers and companies who are staples of our economy and way of life, but who have been cut off from their economy by COVID-19. This budget lifts financial burdens from the shoulders of those made most vulnerable by the devastation of this virus, keeping services running, balance sheet buoyant, and workers healthy. This budget gives businesses the flexibility they need to keep their people invest in new opportunities and prepare for the inevitable end to this pandemic. Together with the Fiji National Provident Fund and our financial sector partners, this evening we are announcing a $1 billion COVID-19 stimulus package. It's at that value. Mr. Speaker, sir, Fijians affected by this crisis can take comfort knowing that this government's record-breaking decades of progress has been defined year after year by our unrelenting commitment to the most vulnerable Fijians. They can trust that this pandemic will not rob us of our strength of character or our ability to help each other. It will not change who we are or how we choose to lead. It will not erode our commitment to leave no Fijian behind, but define it. Right now, that means giving businesses, the workers they employ, and the families they support the financial security they badly need. This is a budget for all these Fijians. We're starting by assisting all of the Fijian workers who rely on the strength of Fijian tourism to sustain their livelihoods. I'm speaking of the chefs, the scuba guides, the wait staff, the receptionists, and all other Fijians who should be preparing for another record-breaking season of visitor arrivals. Instead, they're seeing their hours cut, the doors of the resorts closed, and the jobs disappear. And they cannot simply pack up the serving trays, scuba tanks, and cleaning supplies and start working from home, like so many employees in larger countries and white-collar industries. These Fijians need more than words of support. They need real relief. From 6th April 2020, Mr. Speaker, sir, in fact, we'll be hastening this particular period from tomorrow once the budget gets passed. Fijian workers in the hospitality sector who have lost their jobs or have had their hours cut since 1st February 2020 can, for now, access an initial $1,000 from the FMPF accounts, with additional funds to be considered as the situation unfolds further. If any worker does not have this full amount available, the government will directly subsidize the difference. So if you have only $100 in your FNPF account, you will be receiving $900 boost from your government, and we'll channel this to FNPF. And as we know, there are many workers, for example, who wait staff, etc. They don't have $1,000 that they can withdraw. So we will be actually subsidizing that. And that's for now, because of course this can prolong. All these employees, Mr. Speaker, sir, if you listen to what I'm saying, you'll understand. All these employees, Mr. Speaker, sir, affected by our nationwide physical distancing requirements, who worked at gyms, fitness centers, nightclubs, swimming pools, etc., along with employees in the Lautoka confined area who have been placed on leave without pay or had their hours cut, will be able to access an initial $500 from their FNPF accounts. If other parts of the country are locked down, impacted workers in these areas will be able to access these payments as well. The government will also subsidize the difference for any Fijians who do not have this full amount available. And as the opposition will see, Mr. Speaker, sir, all of these combined unemployment benefits totals to about $60 million. Furthermore, for those affected in the informal sector in the lockdown areas, government will also be providing a one-off relief payment of $150 for those who have a street hawker or a street trader hawker license. These are people who are not with FNPF. These measures and those through FNPF will inject at least a total of $150 million back into the economy, topped off with another $60 million contribution from government. So you're looking at a total of $210 million. For all employees in Fiji, we will reduce the FNPF contribution from 8% to 5%, effective from 1 April 2020 through December 31st, 2020, putting $80 million in the pockets of Fijian workers for the next 9 months, while still maintaining a steady contribution to the superannuation scheme. From 1 April 2020, we will reduce employers' FNPF statutory contributions from 10% to 5% until 31 December 2020. Over the next 9 months, this will keep $130 million in their accounts, helping them sustain their businesses and cash flow, which is a critical issue at this point in time, and minimize job losses and hour reductions. While we know the need is great, no Fijian should make a mad dash for the nearest FNPF office. It's your money, you will get it without putting yourself at a risk of queuing up too close to others. Your money will get to you safely and quickly, directly into your bank accounts, M-Pesa or through Post Fiji. FNPF will announce further details from tomorrow. Just as government is helping employers by reducing the FNPF commitments, we expect employers to work closely with FNPF to assist with the withdrawal process for any of the employees who qualify. To shift the burden of sick leave off businesses and ensure employees who do not have to use their leave, the government will pay 21 days COVID-19 leave for low-income Fijians who have tested positive for the virus, as certified by the Ministry of Health and Medical Services. To keep things flowing smoothly with minimal disruption, any affected employers should continue to pay salaries as normal, and government will then reimburse this directly to the employer. If salaries cannot be paid by the employer, government will fund these salaries upfront. This applies to all workers with less than $30,000 in annual income. Fijians in the informal sector, those who sell stuff by the roadside or have their own businesses and who don't have FNPF, who are confirmed to have contracted the virus, will be paid a one-off sum of $1,000. With so much of life going on hold and no clear timeline ahead of us, loan repayments are the last thing affected Fijians and businesses need on their plate. Under the Consumer Credit Act, Section 66, hire purchase companies, licensed credit institutions and banks are all mandated to go the extra mile for their customers in times of hardship. We've been communicating with the banks and hire purchase companies over the last couple of weeks. Yesterday we got a deal done to defer loan repayments for 6 months for any Fijian or any Fijians who have lost their jobs or had their hours reduced. Mortgages, personal loans, even higher purchase payment plans from stores like Courts and Carpenters, Vinod Patel and all others will all qualify. For those hit hardest, principal plus interest payments may also be deferred as well. The same goes for affected businesses. If you are facing serious cash flow challenges, 6 months of loan repayments will be deferred. If the impact you're feeling is particularly severe, you may qualify to have principal plus interest payments deferred as well. During this period, Mr. Speaker, says we've got an agreement this morning with the banks. Banks will also waive all charges on minimum balance in customers' accounts and remove the minimum purchase requirement for electronic transactions. This is important. You should be able to go and use your card at the nearest store to buy something for $2. The stores will now accept that because we don't want people to be rushing to one store in particular. They should be able to buy this very quickly. They don't have to go to banks and line up to get out cash. They should be able to purchase things through their ATM cards. Apart from the CCA, the Consumer Credit Act, should the situation deteriorate, government has already made a commitment to the banks to give further assurance to them to protect ordinary Fijians who have home mortgages. We will in fact offer them letters of comfort. For the period this time, the CCA will suffice. But if the situation gets bad, government will go ahead and give a letter of comfort to all the banks to protect people's home mortgages. But Mr. Speaker, sir, please let us be clear about this. Those who can pay their mortgages should pay their mortgages. If you have not had a job loss, please pay your mortgages. Don't rob from those who need it now, and don't rob from yourselves if down the track you also require this assistance. Taken together, our new COVID-19 response deal with the banks will provide a relief of an estimated $400 million for workers and companies. That's $820 million in total stimulus so far, if anyone's keeping track of that. An additional $5 million will be added to the Small and Medium Enterprises Credit Guarantee Scheme. Under this scheme, if any of these businesses with an outstanding guaranteed loan fail, the government has more resources to cover 50% of the outstanding loans. We'll also be reviving the Fiji Investment Corporation Limited to aid existing small to medium businesses with immediate equity injections and refinancing opportunities. This will be managed through the Fiji Development Bank. In fact, other banks have also shown an interest in propping up this initiative's capital base. For students repaying tertiary education loans, all repayments will be suspended until 31 December 2020, providing these working Fijians around $10 million in immediate relief. The Reserve Bank of Fiji is also stepping in with an unprecedented economy-wide monetary stimulus. The RBF will reactivate and expand the Natural Disaster Rehabilitation Facility, which has now been renamed the Disaster Rehabilitation and Containment Facility. Under the new facility, RBF will make available $60 million worth of loans available to banks at an interest rate of 1%. Banks can then loan these amounts to small and medium businesses and customers at a maximum rate of no more than 5%. Lower rates mean greater borrowing, giving businesses badly needed financial resources to ease the pressure of this pandemic, keep their doors open and keep people in their jobs. This facility will be made available immediately. The RBF has already slashed the reduced overnight policy rate to 0.5% to stimulate demand, cut borrowing costs, boost consumption and incentivize investment. ANZ and HFC have led their charge by announcing lower lending rates across the board. We expect lending rates to drop even further in the near future. We are on secure financial footing in providing this stimulus. Foreign reserves stand at a high and healthy $2.2 billion, equal to 5.7 months of retained imports. We'll also be rolling out a sweeping package of direct tax reforms and deductions aimed at bolstering our existing businesses and incentivizing new ones to take root. Through the end of 2022, the current, already generous new hotel investment incentive package will be made even more attractive to current industry operators and potential investors, affording an income tax holiday of 5, 7 or 13 years, depending on the level of capital investment. An investment allowance of 25% will also be allowed to cover construction, renovation, refurbishment and extension of new and existing hotels. So as our tourism industry hits pause, our liquidity of course is flush and rates are falling. It would then be a prudent opportunity to prepare for the days when hundreds of thousands of visitors return to our shores. We need to project and think about the future. The export income deduction will be increased from 50% to 60% for the next 3 tax years, 2020, 2021 and 2022. Business loans of up to $20,000 will be allowed to be deducted against employment income. So a person earning $50,000, for example, who also runs or starts a business on the side, can offset the losses of that business against their personal income, even though they only pay PAYE. The certificate of exemption will also be reintroduced for the 5% provisional tax, further boosting businesses' cash flow. The rule for advance payment of tax for companies and other taxpayers will be relaxed from the current 3 payments at a rate of 33.3% to 9 payments at a rate of 11.1%. This more flexible and affordable payment schedule will be based on the post-COVID adjusted profits, offering serious financial relief to businesses, sole traders and partnerships. Penalties on estimated tax will also be removed, with this policy lasting through 31 December 2020. Debt forgiveness by associated companies will not be subject to income tax. This applies to the forgiving of any and all outstanding debt, effective from 1st of April 2020 to 31 December 2020. Also from 1st of April through the end of December, thin capitalization rules will be suspended for local business subsidiaries that rely heavily on borrowings from their parent companies overseas. Previously, these businesses were limited to a 2-to-1 debt-to-equity ratio to qualify for tax deductions. By relaxing this threshold, we will further ensure the cost of borrowing is muted for our foreign-controlled businesses to access capital from their parent companies offshore. A 300% tax deduction will be afforded to employers for wages and salary paid to employees who are self-quarantined with the approval from the Ministry of Health. If the family care leave is available, this deduction will kick in once those days expire. For those who are not compensated by the employer during self-quarantine, government will provide $100 in relief. A 300% tax deduction will also be offered for any donations that businesses make to the government's COVID-19 donor fund, a trust to be utilized for any coronavirus assistance, from medical supplies to economic relief. That fund has been generously kick-started by our Pacific Vuvale, with the New Zealand government providing New Zealand $3 million in cash and the Australian government pitching in Australian $1.5 million in combined cash and in-kind assistance And whilst we were sitting down listening to the opposition, we got news and confirmed news the Australians have now committed another Australian $10.5 million to this fund. The employment taxation scheme. The employment taxation scheme will be further incentivized from its current levels. The tax deduction that businesses can claim on their first full-time employee will increase from 200 to 300%. The tax deduction on wages paid for applicable student apprenticeships will also be increased to 300%. And to continue to build on an inclusive economy through these tough times, Mr. Speaker, sir, deductions for businesses employing Fijians living with disabilities for 3 consecutive years will increase from 300 to 400%. A 100% write-off of up to $10,000 will be made available on the purchase of fixed assets for business purposes. A 100% write-off will also be granted for the construction of new commercial and industrial buildings, provided the appropriate approvals are obtained before the end of this calendar year. To incentivize commercial landlords to reduce rent to fit our current economic landscape and prevent the disruption of broken leases by easing the burden of these reductions to their tenants, a tax deduction will also be given to cover any deductions made to existing rent contracts. This reduction will apply for rent payable between 1 April and 31 December 2020. To give an example, basically it means if somebody is paying rent of $1,000 and the landlord reduces it to $500, that loss of $500 they can claim as a tax deduction. So the landlord has no loss and government will pick up that burden. But we don't want people to be booted out of the shops. Knowing that bookkeeping is going to be complicated by this crisis, we'll also be giving flexibility to businesses when it comes to filing paperwork, waiving penalties for lodging late tax returns or other documents. And to offer serious mortgage relief for our homeowners, we'll also be reducing stamp duty rates for Fiji resident taxpayers for mortgages from 1% to 0%. Foreign nationals will see the mortgages stamp duty reduced from 5% to 0% also. Until we pass this pandemic, Mr. Speaker, sir, the processing of applications and pending payments under the Film Fiji tax rebates are going to be put on hold. Implementation of the VAT monitoring system will be deferred. Added up, these tax measures directly save businesses and exporters and individuals approximately $120 million. Mr. Speaker, sir, unlike past recessions, monetary and financial policy is not a cure-all for any ailing economy. This is first and foremost a crisis of health. Without first winning the war against this virus, the world economy cannot get back up and running. With revenues down and health measures debilitating capital projects, Fiji will be redirecting financial resources in support of our health workers on the front line of combating COVID-19. We are adding another $40 million to enhance our health system's capacity to respond to this pandemic on top of the $347.5 million allocated to the health sector in this financial year. This $40 million top-up will put more simply supplies like face masks to complex and expensive equipment like ventilators in our hospitals. It will fund more personal protective gear for workers and thermal scanners. It will fund the setup of fever clinics throughout the country to isolate at-risk patients. It will fund vital efforts to raise awareness among ordinary Fijians of what they can do to keep themselves healthy. And it will fund the diligent work of our contact tracing team to nip emerging outbreaks in the bud, as well as emergency medical responses and other COVID-19 contingency plans. To ensure the medical sector has the specific technical tools it needs to combat COVID-19 crisis, we'll be introducing a VAT exemption on imports for a vast range of medical supplies and equipment, effective immediately. Hand sanitizer, antibacterial hand wash, vaccinations, hospital beds, scanners and cameras used in medical examination, ethanol for companies already involved in hand sanitizer production, disinfectants, air purifier, medical ground boots, hydrogen peroxide, paper bed sheets, thermostats and other specialized supplies like medicaments under Chapter 30 and medical equipment under Chapter 90 of the Customs Tariff. To this end, the Customs Tariff Act will also see significant changes in the form of fiscal duty cuts to essential medical supplies. The following items will see the fiscal duty reduced to 0%: hand sanitizers, antibacterial hand wash, gloves, masks, disposable hair nets, disinfectant wipes, tissues, medical grade face shields and goggles, protective garments, long sleeve medical gowns. Ethanol for local companies are already involved in hand sanitizer production. Disinfectants, sterilization products, hospital beds, hydrogen peroxide, paper bed sheets, thermostats, air purifier, medical grade boots and hospital beds. Many of these items, Mr. Speaker, sir, were already exempt but only for the public health sector. But now we're opening the same relief to the private sector as well, ensuring Fijians can keep hygienic and healthy levels at as low cost as possible, regardless of where they're treated or buy their own supplies from. So the private sector can now import more of these items and pass these benefits to the customers. This emergency funding to health, along with these new targeted tax measures, pushes our total COVID-19 stimulus package past the $1 billion mark. Mr. Speaker, sir, we'll also take some financial measures at this point in time to strengthen some of our entities. We'll also strengthen the balance sheets of the Fiji Sugar Corporation, PEFCO, Fiji Rice Limited, Food Processors Limited and VT Corp Company Limited by converting their loans into equity, government debt into equity. Government is in the process of acquiring FNPF and Fijian holding shares in the FSC to meet the legal requirements to convert government's debt in FSC into equity. Fiji Rice Limited has already confirmed with the conversion of their debt into equity, they'll inject $1 million into a rice planting scheme. There's also an additional $1 million allocation in the COVID-19 response towards the Ministry of Agriculture to bolster Fiji's food security. In addition, we're allocating $50 million to the FSC to fund cane delivery payments. Government is the only FSC shareholder making an additional financial commitment, not because it's the easy route to take, but because we made a promise to cane farmers and we are keeping our word. However, moving forward, we need to keep a careful eye on the impacts on world sugar prices and make some tough decisions if necessary. Mr. Speaker, sir, even in a crisis, there are some costs that are too high to accept for any Fijian. No matter what happens in the coming months, we've sought agreements with the Water Authority Fiji and Energy Fiji Limited to ensure essential services keep running. Through July 2020, Water Authority Fiji has agreed to cart water to any area in Fiji impacted by water cuts, regardless of expected repair time, at a total cost of $4.25 million, and suspend all water disconnections until 31 December 2020, foregoing $28.4 million in revenue. Mr. Speaker, sir, Energy Fiji Limited, we just struck a deal with them just a few hours before we came here, will now fully match government's existing 50% subsidy on the first 100 units of electricity for all of its subsidized customers. Those households that have registered and are earning less than $30,000 a year annually. That means 100% of the electricity costs up to the first 100 units will be covered by EFL and government, the entire cost, leaving subsidized customers responsible for just a 9% VAT, a move that will keep the lights on for our most vulnerable Fijians. And all subsidized EFL customers will be granted up to one month to make the electricity payments. And this is all up till 31st December 2020. Mr. Speaker, sir, we've of course allocated additional funding, COVID-19 response to the Fijian police force. As you know, they're doing a sterling job despite the various pressures at the new borders that we've established and of course around the country. $700,000, RFMF $150,000, and ICCC, of course, the Fijian Competition and Consumer Commission, $100,000, specifically for COVID-19, because they need to go around to see that people are not putting up the prices. They're not price gouging. Mr. Speaker, sir, while these assurances are vital to uphold our people's well-being, let us be clear. If you can pay your bills, please pay your bills. If you're still working and earning a salary, pay your utility bills. If you pay your bills now, while you can pay them, and if anything happens to your employment down the road, your government will be able to actually assist you also. But if you don't, you'll be robbing the Fijians who need this assistance today, and yourself in the event you'll need this assistance in the future. Mr. Speaker, sir, we are proud that we have delivered this budget only one short week after the COVID-19 hit Fiji. By contrast, the United States, for example, only just passed their own economic stimulus more than 2 months after the first case in January. But times like this call for more flexible policies and billion-dollar stimulus packages. They actually call for leadership, not with words but with deeds. That's why all elected officials, the Prime Minister, ministers, assistant ministers, and all members of Parliament will have their pay cut, or pay suspended I should say, by 20% for the next 6 months. The cost savings for this move add up to around $400,000, an amount that may not seem monumental, but more importantly, Mr. Speaker, sir, shows that we lead from the front, that everyone must share the burden. Because the reality is, in the coming months, many ordinary Fijians may see their hours and pay cut as well, and we, as elected members, must be the first. Mr. Speaker, sir, I urge business leaders across Fiji to show solidarity with the working people of this country. Your legacies as leaders in your own industries will be defined by your actions today. Do not wait to make strategic moves and structural changes to position your business for the long. Do not wait, I should say, Mr. Speaker, sir, if I can read that. Do not wait to make the strategic moves and structural changes to position your business for the long haul. And empowered by this historic stimulus package, do everything you can to look after those who you look to for your employment. Meanwhile, for the time being, we won't be mandating salary cuts across the civil service, nor statutory bodies or government-owned companies. I heard Honourable Prasad say cut salaries, even though he said for all civil servants up to director level. If you cut salaries up to director level 35%, people working below him will be earning, or working below her will be earning more than the director. Mr. Speaker, sir, the rippling socio-economic effects, Mr. Speaker, sir, of even a 10% cut within our nation's largest employer, which is government, would amount to over $150 million in savings. If we cut all the salaries of all the civil servants by 10%, all the statutory bodies, all government entities, there will be $150 million that won't be put out as expenditure and salaries, and would be far-reaching. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, we must display prudence when considering this type of action. We must understand the impact of it. You'll be sucking out $150 million from the economy. $150 million will be less spent in the economy. Do we want that at this point in time? No. Across Fiji, Mr. Speaker, so also, given our social setting in Fiji, across Fiji, it's common to see 2, 3 or more generations sharing a home, often with their aunties, uncles, cousins, brothers, sisters. So a broad-based cut to the pay of our civil service, statutory bodies, government-owned companies would be a painful burden shared by many of those already suffering, such as a hospitality worker or employees from other highly impacted industries, who may share a roof with or is related to a government employee. And in those cases, those workers may very well shift to the primary breadwinner or even the sole income earner in the house. So for now, we'll be keeping money circulating in our economy by keeping salaries where they currently stand across government entities or statutory organizations. If a hotel worker is no longer working and his brother is working in the civil service, who do you think he'll go to? Of course he'll go to his brother, or he'll go to his sister, his cousin, grandfather, uncle, auntie. That's how we do things in Fiji. But even if they are incapacitated from helping them, it will create an even bigger social problem. They need to understand this. Elderly citizens are at most risk from this virus. The mortality for people over the age of 65 is frighteningly high, and these Fijians should stay at home until Fiji is coronavirus free. We'll be reducing the monthly travel allowance for pensioners from $40 a month to $20. And we encourage younger family members to do their shopping and other errands for your elderlies. This will be reviewed in 3 months' time as we hope to return to normalcy. On that front, we'll also be raising revenue through an increased fiscal duty on the importation of diesel and petrol, which will gradually rise by 20 cents per litre. In fact, it will rise by 20 cents per litre. But thanks to a dramatic global reduction in the price of fuel due to a price war being waged between Russia and Saudi Arabia, Fijians will still end up paying lower rates for fuel than what they do today. There are fewer significant expenditures, Mr. Speaker, sir. There are a few other significant expenditures in this response budget not directly related to COVID-19 response. We are adding another $20 million to the education sector to cater mainly for teachers' salaries now that the total of teachers working in the country has been consolidated. And we're beefing up social welfare with another $20 million to cater for those who already qualify for social welfare even before the COVID-19 crisis. Mr. Speaker, sir, and as I mentioned about the $50 million for FSC, Fiji National University, Mr. Speaker, sir, will also explore a new partnership with YLSE to strengthen online learning. With 430,000 people using the YLSE platform, this is an opportunity to leverage technology to create a more inclusive and resilient education system in Fiji. And already the Minister of Education is working on a number of policy initiatives in this respect. Mr. Speaker, sir, these are the most immediate, rapidly deployable steps we can take today to prepare our people, our hospitals, our businesses, big and small, and our economy as a whole for the COVID-19 phenomena. Given the devastating nature of this crisis and the unprecedented blows to our revenue, our economy is contracting and we are borrowing substantially more than what we planned for. These are extraordinary times that call for extraordinary measures. The budget deficit is at 9%. As a result, our debt to GDP ratio will increase to 60.9%. As soon as the clouds of this pandemic part, we expect an economic rebound and stronger revenues that allow us to rein down our debt. A great many possibilities still lie before us, Mr. Speaker, sir. We must all recognize that this virus will fundamentally reshape our society, how we do business, and how we interact. We must embrace this new reality and think proactively about how we can adapt by harnessing technology, by rethinking productivity and margins, and by changing not only the workplace, but how we view work itself. And as we ask businesses and individuals to look inward through the duration of this crisis and this budget, government must do the same. Depending on how this situation evolves, more response measures will come and more help will be provided, and still more sacrifices may have to be made. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, we will not rest until Fiji fully recovers. By remaining diligent, we have good reasons to place faith in our future. Fiji can come back from this crisis better, smarter, and more capable of seizing opportunities that will one day emerge. Mr. Speaker, sir, this week China announced that it will lift the mass quarantine in the central province of Hubei after a decline in new COVID-19 infections. On the 8th of April, the city of Wuhan, the epicenter of the global pandemic, will end its controls on outbound traffic. As the lockdown ends and the first of Wuhan's residents to depart the city since January reconnect with friends and family, as factory floors refill with workers and resume production, as restaurants welcome back diners and hotel fills their rooms, the entire world will see a glimpse of normalcy, of recovery, and of hope. The trend is looking similar in places that have been most aggressive with combating coronavirus, where zero tolerance of rule breakers was most strictly enforced, and where, even more importantly, the general population took this disease more seriously. Nations like South Korea, Taiwan, and even China are proving that global and national containment measures can actually work. But in most of the rest of the world, things are going to get far, far worse before they even start getting better. Given the enormous risks and the vast unknowns, we must recognize that this disease is, above all else, unpredictable. So our response will need to be able to adapt alongside the reality on the ground. We need to remember that the situation could dramatically change and our needs could dramatically shift as this budget holds us over to the end of this financial year. Just like no one could predict this global pandemic or just how far-reaching and devastating it could be, no one can predict precisely how it will unfold in Fiji, the Pacific, or the world, not in 2 months, not in 2 days, and not even in 2 hours. Perhaps all we can predict is that our ability to combat this crisis depends directly on how many of our people are careless versus how many show care for the community and our country. Mr. Speaker, sir, amidst this churning sea of instability, this budget and this government will always provide steadfast direction and decisive leadership, guided by a beacon of hope. Each of us in Parliament today is blessed to be here, in good health and representing the Fijian people. We bound by our duty to God and country to lead Fiji through these unpredictable times. And in a moment when lives are on the line, we cannot take that duty lightly. We must act quickly. We must act decisively. We haven't a moment to spare. Let's for once cast petty partisanship aside, come together and pass this budget with a resounding consensus. For the nurses who are awaiting supplies, for the families awaiting FNPF assistance to pay their bills, for businesses wanting to stay afloat, for the laid-off workers awaiting relief, for all Fijians, Mr. Speaker, sir, and indeed for Fiji. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
I thank the Honourable Attorney General and Minister for Economy. Honourable members, pursuant to the resolution of Parliament passed tonight, the Honourable Minister for Economy has now delivered the COVID-19 response budget address. We will continue with the response from the Honourable Leader of the Opposition tomorrow morning. Secretary General.
Adjournment.
Honourable members, at this juncture, I thank the Honourable Attorney General and the Minister for Economy, Civil Service and Communications for delivering the supplementary budget tonight. I reiterate the statement of our Honourable Prime Minister that Fiji is at war with the coronavirus, and therefore it is prudent that we all join the fight by washing our hands with soap and water, practicing physical and social distancing, and following any and every directive given by the authorities. Honourable members, I apologize that there will be no refreshments served tonight. Now, you realize from the position that you were sitting how lonely I feel at times when I'm here. Thank you, honourable members. Parliament is now adjourned until tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. We adjourn.